Okay, great. Well, yes, it's great. Thank you very much, Annie. It's great to be here. Yes, I'm Stephen Sale. I'm Research Director at Analysys Mason, and my focus is to look at consumer services, the bulk of operator revenue, and I'm going to mainly focus on what's already happened. Right, so the emphasis here is what have we learned about 5G so far. I'm going to be talking about the past and the present more than the future. Obviously, a lot has happened so far, but we've also got a long way to go. There's a lot to talk about with 5G, and I've only got a few minutes slots here, so please bear with me as I am very selective in my skip through 5G. I'm going to talk a little bit first about what 5G looks like and what kind of effect it's had on the telco business so far. So in terms of what the consumers are getting, they're normally getting larger data allowances. So as 5G mobile comes to market, it's supported by hundreds of gigabyte packages. In many cases, more unlimited data packages. Sometimes this has been supported by speed tiering, so an explicit move to unlimited in a few markets with tariffs demarcated by the amount of speed that you get. So it could be 10 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, 500 megabits per second, for instance. This is the kind of approach that we've seen from Elisa and Swisscom for a long time now, but certainly many operators are seeing 5G as an opportunity to extend that model. And quite a few others have got on board with it. So Telenor in the Nordics is an advocate of this, and Vodafone has been taking this approach in many of its European markets. We've also seen quite a lot of content bundles come with 5G, not necessarily the fancy new funky stuff. Often the content bundles are very familiar things to the customers. It's the known. And in terms of the effect of this on the business that I mentioned, operators are really hoping that 5G will stimulate demand for high performance connectivity and that customers will pay more for this. So specifically looking at ARPU uplift as customers move from 4G to 5G. And it's still fairly early days, but we've got a few benchmarks. There's very selective reporting. And the chart on the table here, you can see a few benchmarks from around the world. In terms of 5G penetration of the handset base, South Korea and China are some way ahead. In South Korea, it's 25–30% now. More common is 5 to 10%. Still very much early adopter level, of course. And then if we think of how this has played through in terms of ARPU uplift, quite a few operators are reporting that specific customers, as they move from 4G to 5G, are paying more. There's a few benchmarks here, so 10% uplift, 20% uplift, a few euros, a few dollars extra. In terms of the overall business, because we're talking about a minority of customers, this hasn't necessarily sort of rippled through to overall service revenue increase or overall ARPU increase. The closest that we've seen to that is probably in South Korea, where we have a meaningful percentage of like a quarter of the customers. And what we've seen there is that ARPU that has been in long-term decline through the sort of the tail end of the 4G era has now stabilized. So that is very much a positive. Seeing something similar in Taiwan, consistent decline in ARPU trend has now stopped, and there are some indications that things might start to swing up. So, but it's still fairly early days, still fairly low proportions of customers. So this doesn't necessarily sort of push through on the wider business. We've done some surveying work of consumers to find out what they think about 5G. I've got a couple of the results here. Here we've got the figures from the European samples. So it's 9 countries in Europe, 1,000 respondents each, so 9,000 customers. And we asked the customers who were planning to get 5G, there's obviously still sort of fairly low subscriber numbers at the moment. We asked those customers why they wanted 5G, what they attracted to. You can see very much standing out here, higher speed. So, so customers see the appeal of 5G in terms of something very tangible, which is a better user experience, higher speeds, faster download, better usage of their apps. A few are also looking for the bigger data allowances that are often associated with the 5G plans. A few, 30%, hope that 5G is going to alleviate poor user experience in congested areas and busy cities and sort of transport hubs. Quite a few customers are going to get 5G simply because they've got a 5G handset. 31% say that. And then in terms of the funky stuff, the things that we associated with the kind of a new wave of 5G and the 5G experiences that are specific to 5G, we've got 11% of upgraders saying that they were interested in that. So this is AR, VR, new gaming experiences rather than existing experiences. So in terms of the customer perception, it's very much we're going to carry on doing what we're doing, but we want to do it in a better way, and the telco can facilitate that. In terms of the new things, I think we see a few areas where there's been most activity, mainly around the entertainment side on the consumer market. So I think rich media is an interesting area. So this is typically building on an existing content proposition, looking at multiple video streams, the choice of views, lots of analytic overlays, adding in sports stats and so on, and also applying some integration of some social functions. So not necessarily 5G specific, but 5G certainly helps manage more going on in a video service. There's a few examples, mainly from Asia. There's a little bit of activity elsewhere, and certainly quite a lot of interest in sports content and applying an enhanced experience there. AR VR, which I'll come back to a little bit later, is very much, it's quite sort of niche at the moment. There's not that much activity. It's quite experimental, I think, partly because the content isn't there, and certainly COVID didn't help there. In many markets, the content studios have struggled to produce this. It's often quite sort of bitty and piecemeal and experimental. Let's try out a K-pop service. Let's try out like a home fitness service. Let's try out some celebrity experiences. And there's a lot of activity in Asia. Generally, it's bundled in for free with 5G, with the hope that further down the line they'll be able to monetize. Then the third category here is cloud gaming, and this is much more widespread. It's much more common to see a 5G service including some sort of gaming element, and often it's a game streaming cloud gaming service. There are a number of different options for operators in terms of the go-to-market. They can white label a service. They can partner with other providers. They can act as aggregators potentially. It's probably still early days for that. There are quite a lot of complicated questions about the market structure in gaming and the segmentation and how that works with the operator brand. But I think this will play through, and I think there's demand from various players here to make it work in some form. And in many cases, there's more of an enablement role from the telco to go in as an edge cloud partner to help build a point of presence in a particular country to improve a service. There's quite a lot of activity there. I think you've probably heard quite a lot about this already today, but certainly when we think about the new things that are happening, then certainly private networks is a big focus for that. Partly because it's a managed environment where various players can experiment within a specific set of needs and requirements. It's not dependent on nationwide rollouts, and there's been a big push with lots of activity there. So we can put a few numbers against that. We track the deployment of private networks in both LTE and 5G environments. And the most recent tracker from just a month or so ago, 3Q 2021, there were 256 reported live or trial deployments. There are many more than this, probably over 1,000, but they're not necessarily going to be publicly disclosed. If you look at the chart on the left, we've broken down who's been the primary contractor there. You can see that it's been led generally by the network equipment providers, selling directly to enterprises or bringing in operator partners. The telcos themselves have been pretty active. They account for 81 of the 256 initiatives. Specialist network providers such as Ethernet and Federated Wireless have developed to target this opportunity. A few enterprises have done it alone. You've probably heard of these, Bosch and Fujitsu. And the systems integrators haven't really got much of a foothold yet, but we expect more of that activity to take place, particularly in countries where there's industrial spectrum policies. In terms of the sectors where we're seeing the most activity, manufacturing has the lion's share. 30% of the total initiatives were in the manufacturing sector. You can see that 5G takes a good proportion of those too. A lot of this is driven by the car manufacturers, BMW, Daimler, Ford, all early adopters, looking for low latency and future-proofing of these kinds of initiatives. In terms of transports, mainly ports and airports, large amounts of equipment to monitor and control, and the need for mobility. And then the third largest sector is mining, oil and gas, predominantly in the mining sector, and predominantly LTE. A lot of this is underground, and certainly there's more of a need for wide area coverage in remote places. The focus of a lot of these efforts have been in countries where there has been the spectrum availability. So Germany, well-known example for industrial 5G licenses, the US with CBRS spectrum, and China is also a big focus where there's been a lot of activity from Huawei and the government. I'll move on to just focus a little bit on an analogous set of activities that are a bit more focused on the consumers as the end user rather than the B2B proposition, looking more B2B to C here. But again, the importance of location, I think, is really important, particularly in sort of relatively early days of 5G coverage. So enabling important locations, transport hubs, tourist locations, hotels, shopping malls, stadiums, concert venues, and so on. There's quite a lot of activity around this, but also it's potentially quite complicated. There's multiple partners to negotiate with. There's landlords, there's rights holders, there's various brands potentially involved, but we are starting to see some kind of activity here. And often this is more operators taking a B2B to C kind of an enablement role, helping brands to offer a richer experience within a particular location. So you can think of the example of going to a stadium and having being able to buy extra services through an app to engage during the game with various kind of rich content, a social aspect, potentially a great experience. But for that to happen, many parts need to come into place, and this is one of the challenges for operators now, to think through some of that enablement role, thinking through some of the complexity, and potentially taking a lead. Got a couple of examples here. CSL in Hong Kong that has done quite a lot of work on enabling smart malls with 5G, and actually going in working with the retailers themselves to develop their own content propositions so that consumers can have an enriched experience in the store. And O2 UK, which of course owns venues, which gives it a kind of a way in here. and certainly a motivation. They've done a lot of work around the O2 arena for a 5G experience, but also to take some concert experiences and take those virtually. And just before I wrap up, just one sort of longer term kind of ponder. So what I've been talking about is generally been quite near term, and I think we've seen operators struggling a little bit with some of the future aspects here of the longer term vision for 5G and how they can benefit from that. So this is thinking a bit more about the 2030 kind of vision and how telcos can play a role there. So this is very much dependent on devices coming to market. So this could be headsets, smart glasses, smart cars, a whole bunch of wearables. And I think probably the most recent kind of move that we've seen here, of course, over the last few months is the whole talk about the metaverse. I'm not going to go into it in any detail here, but I'm sure you're all aware that whatever shape or form ends up materializing here, I think we will see more of a role for augmented experiences and for virtual reality. I think this is probably a more of a tangible opportunity than what we were seeing recently, a year or two ago, the tactile internet. I think this makes more sense. I think the question of what the operators can do about it is a big open question at the moment. I think for a lot of this sort of future vision, they are very much reliant on other players taking the lead, and the telcos really need to spend some time thinking about where they're going to play in the value chain, how much of an enablement role is viable. If they're going to play an enablement role, who are their customers and what do they need? I think in the consumer market, there's some big difficult questions there that are less easily answered than they are in some of the enterprise use cases that you've been hearing about earlier. So a bit of a mad dash through a few big questions there, but I'm just going to summarize by saying there's been very much a focus on continuity mobile in 5G, giving customers a little bit more of what they already have, a better user experience generally. This is tangible, there is value, there is demand there, but it won't transform the fortunes of the industry. It's basically adding a few extra tools to the operator's toolkit to do what they currently do. In terms of kind of new stuff, there are certainly new opportunities in the private networks, and telecoms operators have potential roles to play there. Certainly, it's quite a competitive environment, but there's certainly clear differentiation and value add to the telco players. Been hearing a lot about connectivity, but there is more to do there. But there's only certain telcos who can do this, and I think this one of the kind of the missing pieces of the 5G story is what do you do if you're a smaller telco without big enterprise capabilities? Do you do 5G core? Where do you go next? And then, so finally, the longer term vision in the consumer market, some of the big kind of 2030 type transformation questions keep on getting pushed back. They keep on getting deferred by the telcos. The telecoms operators don't really know what to do. They're very much on the back foot, and have to have a good think about what kind of enablement roles there might be. Who their customers would be for this, and exactly what those customers might need. So thank you very much for bearing with me at the end of the conference. I'd be very keen to hear from you, and drop me a line directly, or I think we've probably got a couple of minutes for questions.
We have a question here for you, Stephen. Thank you. That was very interesting, actually. So do you see disruption for the arrival of 5G devices due to the microchip shortage, or will be just the networks when the networks will be there? So is the disruption from 5G devices going to be when the network's there and when the chip shortage is over, I think? Either.
Well, I think in terms of the general kind of handset proposition for consumers, 5G has been very much a success story of getting relatively cheap devices to customers relatively quickly in terms of technology rollouts. You know, we are seeing operators with a very good array of handset selection at pretty competitive price points, down to sort of $200 kind of mark, and that is the biggest driver here. And I think one of the challenges that operators have in many markets is that handset replacement rates are still quite long. And I don't see the sort of local chipset shortages making that much difference to that sort of broader kind of roll through question.
Okay, and I don't know. I feel a bit. I don't know. It's a bit dispiriting to say that you feel the operators keep pushing the transformation programs further and further back, and that they have a long way to go yet in the ways of figuring out how to get beyond connectivity, particularly in the enterprise scenario. But don't you think part of the problem is that in different instances they're going to have to play different roles?
Yeah, I think my longer term transformation point is largely talking about the bigger consumer picture. Certainly in terms of the enterprise opportunities, I think it's a little bit clearer. I think there is a question of who is able to tackle them. Many operators have sort of big systems integrated departments and good focus on particular vertical markets, and they're able to offer connectivity partnerships and move up the value chain. And I think they're probably in quite a good position to make use of 5G as part of that enterprise future. The more of the question mark for me is around some of the B2B2C enablement, that I think there are possibilities and opportunities, but need to be qualified. But also the broader transformation piece around the kind of a consumer vision of us engaging with high value performance content in social environments and virtual and augmented way. That's going to take a long time to come. There's always question marks about how much of it is going to be fixed, how much of it is going to be mobile, how much of it's going to be Wi-Fi, how much of it's going to be on 5G. I think there are some really interesting questions to explore there, to dig into how much a consistent experience across mobile and fixed will be needed from the consumers. And I think at the moment, a lot of work needs to be done we need to talk to Facebook. But what kind of connectivity plus sort of enhancements, what kind of value can a telco add? Are we looking at sort of fiber plus standard 5G, or is there potential for a network slice kind of proposition here? I haven't come across it yet, but I think there is work to be done to dig into this, to have a better understanding of what telcos target customers here might need.
Okay, Stephen, thank you very much.